All right. Hello and welcome to the Senteon and CIS webinar series. I'm not sure where my co-host is yet, but hopefully he joins here in a minute. I know he had to miss last week. As my cat walks on my keyboard, hopefully I don't lose connection. 1 second. All right, Bruno wanted to be part of the show. We're getting used to our new studio arrangement. We have officially moved into our RV. So Chase, thanks for being the first guest from this new environment for me.
Yeah, well, you're mobile, and it's always good when the cat decides to drop in on a call.
Dude, I was in a meeting right before this. They found the hotkey to put on airplane mode, so had to reconnect my Bluetooth, lost the meeting. Fortunately, he's a very nice guy. Anywho, we are at the webinar, and hopefully Rich joins us. But Chase, thanks for being here. Looking forward to hearing your insights here. So before we jump into the settings, we will hop into Senteon really quick. So Senteon is a platform to perform automated system hardening. And the events we have coming up, if we can pull this up on the big screen, moderator. We are finalists in the Pitch It competition. So we will be heading over to IT Nation as next week, November 6th is coming up. And I will be presenting a 5-minute pitch on Senteon against some of my competitive peers to prove why Senteon needs a larger place in the market. Also, you can check out Senteon on our website. All of these webinars are live streamed, and you can watch the recording on our website or our YouTube channel. You can see here they're all saved for you. And also for joining the webinar, you can sign up by clicking this login button for our freemium. Freemium will give you access to all of our compliance crosswalk database so that you can see each setting, learn about what each setting is, the pathway, the explanation. All of this comes straight from CIS, but we do also provide the documentation as to why it crosswalks to a relevant framework. And the last special offer for the listening guests, Senteon is happy to provide free assessments of your current security posture. So you can see here, this is primarily a default Windows box. And you can see all of the settings that you're missing, the recommendations per framework, and everything that you might need to do. If you want to check out the full experience of Senteon, that is going to be shown right here with the remediation factor built in. So you can go ahead and get that compliance report all built into the tool and perform the remediation. The big thing is we are actually fixing the things we find. So with that, though, Chase, man, welcome. And thank you for calling in right before you go on stage for a whole nother presentation, man. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, I appreciate you letting me jump in. It's just that time of year where you're like, running around, bouncing and doing lots of things with lots of folks. So anytime I can, jump on and chat, especially about browser stuff, I'm always in for that.
Tell you what, man, I mean, Dr. Zero Trust too. I know you are one of the few people who probably still care about configurations. Realize an EDR, a whitelisting tool probably is not that single silver bullet. You need to do more than that.
Yeah, if it was, there wouldn't be the problems we have in the market. I mean, the proof is in the pudding, and it's one of those deals where I spend probably 30 minutes every morning. I go off through Shodan and do a bunch of searches and run a bunch of things. And then I go run some Google dorks and whatever. And I'm always just like shocked at the easy, simple stuff I find. 10-year-old misconfigs, whatever.
It's crazy. The things we see, in the MSP space, and I'm sure enterprise is the same. You can talk towards this, but when you manually upgrade your systems, a lot of that configuration residue, if you want to call it that, but that old historic configurations, we find the service computer browser constantly installed on devices, and that's like an old SMB file sharing service that no one needs. It's by default, it's now disabled, but we find it constantly in our learning mode and what we see in the market. So this type of stuff doesn't go away unless you intentionally make it go away.
Yeah, there's no age off for old jacked up configs. Like, it doesn't just suddenly fix itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But Jace, I got to meet you at RSA. You were nice enough to invite myself and some of my partners, Dan Lee, out to your happy hour where got to see Demo Force and the cool things you're up to there, but also meet a lot of your colleagues. So thanks for being a welcoming friend to the entrepreneurship community, right? Senteon is an early stage company. So thanks for supporting us the same way you support everyone else. But please introduce yourself a little bit more and who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Chase Cunningham. I'm Dr. Cunningham if you want to be formal, or Dr. Zero Trust if you're talking about the podcast and whatever. I'm a retired Navy chief. I was a cryptologist in my career. Then I went to NSA for a number of years. I was at Forrester Research for a while after that, and I launched a bunch of the ZT stuff into the market. So if you're sick of hearing about Zero Trust, I apologize. And then I do a bunch of work too for other orgs. Currently, I'm also working as a VP for security market research at G2. And then over the course of the last 2 years in my copious free time, I built this platform with some friends of mine called DemoForce, and we're helping vendors and users understand how technology actually works. So it's I stay busy is the thing.
Copious free time. I think you could probably give a webinar all about time management, man. That was a ton of things you're up to.
Yeah, working on book number 8 right now too. So yeah.
As you do a webinar before an in-person speaking event, absolutely stunning, man. Now, I do want to give a live testimonial to DemoForce. This is something we have checked out as a vendor. It's been extremely useful, and the use case is immense, right? It allows, and you can present this yourself, but from what we've seen from our perspective, it allows our resellers, our MSPs, to basically demonstrate Senteon in a real environment that they don't have to manage. So they don't have to sign up. They don't have to, provide their information to Senteon or whatever vendor. They can work with DemoForce to show their clients and utilize it to get a feel of the platform before actually purchasing it. Anything you want to add on DemoForce, Jace?
So I think the one of the other things too that we didn't really understand was most people really despise the whole bait and switch we do with the book a demo, and then they go to a scheduling link and it winds up, you have to schedule it. And then, oh, by the way, you're a CISO or someone trying to experience software. Let me shove a demo into your 8-hour workday and add that to your list of things to do. This way, you can do it at 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday if you want to and get the demo. The vendor information's all there as well. And then the other part that was kind of interesting was all the vendors that are trying to sell into channel, which is a great way to do it. You upscale your workforce. However, the odds of you keeping up with the channel sort of cadence are really hard to do if you don't have a virtual system to take care of that. So those things are beneficial for the end user and for the vendor.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. So really looking forward to working with you more on that and being as much of a resource as I can. It's been great getting to learn more about you and the company. But this week's episode, obviously, we're talking about Edge browser hardening and CIS. Someone with your stature and the background you've worked with, CIS. I mean, this is basic stuff, like someone even with your experience, do you still look towards CIS? Is this still something you care about as senior as you are? Or is this something only for beginners? What's your view on CIS as a whole?
No, I think CIS benchmarks are valid. I think that there's a lot of use there for people that are especially small and mid-sized business that are trying to say we're going to subscribe towards a standard and kind of work towards that. I mean, the thing you also have to remember anytime someone's talking about standards or benchmarks or frameworks or reference architecture, those are lines in the sand and guides. Those are not meant to be the end all be all, stop here when you do this thing. So people should understand that too. Unfortunately, a lot of folks will move towards a CIS benchmark and they hit the benchmark and like, all right, great. And that's it. And then you realize, well, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of other things I should do continually. This is marathon. It's not something that you achieve point in time.
Yeah. And I think Microsoft doesn't really help with that whole sprints approach either, because once you set these settings once, they don't always stay in place from what we've seen. This configuration drift concept is constant, and it's not just the admins that probably shouldn't have access. It's Windows updates. It's various applications that are installed. Things change settings after they're in place that one time. I mean, this is something you've also seen.
Yeah, I mean, this is a dynamic space. I mean, cyber and IT, computer, whatever you want to call it, is a space where it's like a Rubik's Cube from hell, right? Like it's constantly changing and evolving. Yeah, it's a movie. Remember the movie Hellraiser, like where the
yes, of course I do.
That's literally what we're dealing with here. And if you're not paying attention to it, it's going to get past you quickly. And the other issue is really, it's one thing to have one machine with the Rubik's Cube moving. It's another for 100,000 Rubik's Cubes to all be moving at the same time in different configurations. So if you're not moving forward on this, then you're going to be at the bad spot. And then the last thing you want to be is 2 years down the road and go, oh God, we got to go update 500,000 machines. I mean, look what happened with CrowdStrike, right? I mean, there was 40,000 servers for Delta that manually had to be pulled to fix the updates.
Yep. That was a tough one. So But absolutely. I mean, that, for example, really is just one thing, which was oversight on their side. It was, you know, a config, a file, whatever that was. But these settings, they really can break things. But the return on security investment is immense if you implement them the right way. So very awesome to get your testimony on just the value of these settings, even with someone with all this experience. So with that, let's transition to today's topic with the Edge browser hardening. So when we talk about hardening the browser, Chase, is this something everyone needs to be doing, just enterprises? Like these settings, well, and I'll wrap up here in a moment, but the thing that surprised me most about the settings we discussed in these webinars is they're not configurable via the browser itself. These are configured in the registry, in the OS, to harden the browser. And I'm not sure everyone, and maybe our listeners already know this, but I don't think a lot of people realize how to even configure the browser, or why it matters.
I would say most people don't really understand the nuances of what has to happen there. And it's, you've got kind of a couple choices here. You can move towards an enterprise browser type thing where you're going to pay to have that kind of handled and go along that route and whatever else. Or you could do it in some way, shape, or form on your own with these sort of other approaches. But there's a whole lot of things that move in there. And I personally think that the browser, especially in today's world, is probably the single most important thing that you're going to do for your users. I mean, we're literally on the browser right now doing this webinar. I've used the browser for 30 things today. So if you're going to get compromised, it's probably going to start with that, because that's your window to the internet. So where else would you apply controls first? Like, you can have amazing IAM program and microseg and blah, 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 and whatever else. If you're not taking care of the browser for your users, you're literally just letting them run around the internet and hoping bad things don't happen.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I've really put together too is, like, yes, these are preventative settings. They're mitigating risks. They're reducing the attack surface. But what is the outcome of reducing the attack surface? And what I've really pieced together from just hearing the stories, hearing people like yourself speak is, you know, if a fish is clicked, a fish gets through, you click a fish, these controls are going to mitigate the damage or the chance of that already clicked on fish doing what it needs to do. It's going to stop the next step in the attack chain by having these in place. So yeah. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but why the hell aren't people talking about this more? I mean, these settings have been around for decades. Why is it now this webinar series, or, you know, what's going on that this is now being talked about, and why wasn't it talked about for so long?
So if I put my cyber conspiracy theorist hat on, it's really because of the fact that phishing training became a thing so fast, and people treated it like it was an actual fix. And you had billion-dollar companies, investors get involved and whatever, and it became the giant money pit that it is. When in reality, like, I don't care what you can think you can train people to do. You're not going to stop people clicking on links. Like, it just isn't going to work. You might reduce it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't train people, but it's not a technical control. Like, this is a technical space. You use technology to mitigate those threats and risks. And I usually laugh out loud when I do advisory work with these organizations, and they say, oh, well, we've reduced our click rate to like 3%. Great. You have 100,000. Yeah, you have 100,000 employees. You just gave me 3,000 people that are going to click on something. Like, so what?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And taking the attack chain to the next step, that 3%, that lateral movement compromises the other 97% without these preventative controls in place.
Yeah. And I mean, the browser is something that you're not going to get rid of. Like, you're going to continue to see it become even more useful and more tied into your everyday business side. So either get ahead of it, or just basically sit there and cross your fingers and pray to, you know, whoever you believe in, because it's going to get worse.
So is there any thoughts on, like, why this is becoming a hotter topic? Because I, for one, like, we've been doing this for a few years. You know, it was, you know, people reached out every now and then, but even now, us as an early stage company, we're getting reached out constantly. It's like browser hardening is the new hot thing, and configuration management matters now. Has there been a shift, or have you seen anything you can really point to why this matters now?
I mean, I think people have realized that the return on investment with training is just kind of a wasted effort. And the fact that it's not provided the return that people were expecting is starting to bubble up. And the other side of it is that the leadership that's now in place are people that actually have come from the breach era, I guess you could call it. Like, we were all coming up when breaches really were as bad as they possibly could have been. So those folks are now in leadership positions, and they're the ones in the boardrooms and in the executive suites saying, like, look, man, we got to do something different. If we don't, we're going to be in a bad spot. Configuration management at scale is a key and core thing that people understand now has to be taken care of.
It's a really good point. I'd never really put it in that perspective. Just like the engineers who dealt with that ransomware attack, who saw how it could have been mitigated, couldn't make the change then, but now they've moved up.
Yeah, I mean, us old graybeards like myself, like we're finally at least got a seat at the table. And I mean, when you've been battle scarred, you know, you at least sort of go like, I don't think that's a good idea. We should do something different.
A good take. I might steal that. All right, let's jump into some of these settings here. So the very first one, and we do only, I think, have like 11 or 12 settings, so we're doing great on time. But the first one here, enforce Bing SafeSearch, is set to enabled, which means to configure moderate search restrictions in Bing. So is this saying like I can't search certain things, like only explicit? Like why is this important?
So I mean, well, number one, if anyone's actually using Bing, like you should figure out what the hell's wrong with you. But I mean, the other side of it too is you're just putting some basic restrictions in there. Adult content is going to be, you know, the largest area, statistically speaking, for compromising activity is pornography. So just remove it. Pornography, gambling, those types of things, especially in the enterprise space. Like if you want to do that stuff at home, by all means, go bonkers, have a good day. But in an enterprise space, if I'm your CISO, sorry, you're not searching porn at work.
Yep. And what's interesting about this, I will call out the format of the slide. So in the bottom right, we do have the level 2. So that means CIS determined this was a potentially disruptive settings to the end client experience. So I'm curious, and I don't think you'll have an answer for this, but like maybe there are scenarios where it is a accurate search and they need to do a certain search that, you know, Bing thinks is explicit or thinks is adult content, and it's actually not. So maybe that's why CIS determined this was a level 2 setting, might misclassify certain things.
I mean, probably just, you know, sledgehammer type thing. I would say that they probably said, yeah, this is potentially problematic. But then again, you know, how many folks, number one, are using Bing search? And then number two, how many folks have a valid reason to be searching those sites via the browser at work?
Yep. Very, very much so. All right, let's get to this next setting. And it's another safe search setting here. This time we're talking about Google safe search is set to enabled. Very similar thing here. So we don't have to repeat that. But do you have any suggestions to the MSP or the enterprise? Is there a way to control which search engine, or is there a good search engine for them to use? Do you have opinions on that?
Personally, I'm a big fan of Chrome just because of, I mean, the other thing that you have to remember too is all these cool enterprise browser capabilities that have come out. They're all Chromium anyway. So like Chrome is kind of there whether you want to admit it or not. So
I mean, Edge runs on Chromium, right?
Oh,
I mean, it's all Chromium.
Yeah. So I mean, I think if you're going to leverage an enterprise level browser, it's Chrome, in my opinion. Edge is kind of wonky and has some weird stuff going on it. Bing is just general trash. Safari's, only Mac people know how to use Safari. So like in an enterprise level, I think it's going to be Chrome.
Yep, very much. And like you said before, same thing with this setting. There's no reason to accept the risk or to allow employees to do things they shouldn't. I mean, if you work in the field that needs adult content, like, yeah, obviously this setting is not going to probably apply to what you're doing. So you need to moderate it more and make exceptions. But that doesn't mean the setting doesn't matter. So very similar settings here, but again, it emphasized the defense in depth of how, you know, you do one setting, you think you're good, but there's literally a second setting that does the exact same thing, but slightly different. If you only do one, you're not really doing all of it.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft actually has an engineering principle that goes back to day zero that they call the rule of threes, right? Like you should be able to do anything inside a Microsoft operating system 3 different ways. And that's good, but it's also problematic. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I hope. I mean, is that why there's so? I mean, there from the CIS benchmark perspective, I think L1 settings is about 430 recommendations. That would be disgusting if there could just be 120.
I mean, that goes all the way back to like when they first rolled it out, that they wanted to make sure that you could do anything 3 different ways, either via the command line, via the browser, via the whatever. So there's always going to be that.
That makes a lot more sense. Literally when I do all of my onboardings, like, hey, don't forget this. A lot of settings that come back to back to back where they're all sounding the same, but if you look at the pathway, they're all different pathways. So very
That's
interesting
literally an
takeaway
engineering
there.
principle for Microsoft.
Had no idea. I also just learned from a previous guest, like Microsoft got rid of their GPO department as a whole a few years ago.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I don't know if Intune with and moving all to ADMX files, I don't know if Intune is as reliable as people may think with the endpoint specifically.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, let's go. Keep on going. So the next one here is enhance the security state in Microsoft Edge is set to enabled balanced mode. I mean, anything where you're enhancing the security state, I feel like that dial should probably be turned up as high as possible, see if it's okay, and then move it down as needed. But it looks like at minimum, CIS is recommending to put it in balanced mode. Any insight as to what this actually means here?
Balance mode inside of Edge is just really going to make sure that you don't kind of have just default interruptions for the things that people do that are very like graphic or have a big drag on process and compute. And it's okay. Like that makes sense. If you really look at the way Edge works too nowadays, it's very like your computer sounds like a Harrier trying to take off when you're using Edge because of all the stuff that it does. So this actually will help you with more optimal settings for bandwidth and those things as well. So that's why they call it balanced, is it's balancing optimization, usage, process, compute, and access.
I was hoping you'd go to the resources, because that's another thing that I like to emphasize a lot. And I'll ask this probably again at the end of the episode, but a lot of people are like, oh yeah, the CIS benchmarks are just for security. Like, I'm not regulated. Like, security is important, but it's so much work. But at the end of the day, there is more to these settings than just the security benefit. It's performance enhancements. It's making sure your employees can't go to areas they can't get to those areas. They're not going to get stopped. They're not going to submit tickets to, hey, I got to this spot, now I want to go further, right? They never even had a chance to get to the spot where they want to go further, right? This is stopping things sooner, keeping employees and clients in the right lane. So it increases the performance and optimization of the resources, but also the people. It creates a security culture through enforcing policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those ones where personally, like when I do advisory work, I tell people I don't necessarily try and put a security culture in place. My goal is to basically make it where security happens and the culture is the culture.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of that, security consulting, and I know you're already stretched for bandwidth, Chase, Dr. Cunningham, but is there any way people can reach out to you? Is there a best form of contact if anyone wants to follow up after this?
Yeah, just DM me on LinkedIn is the easiest way to get a hold of me, and then we can go from there. I'm the only guy on LinkedIn that's got a cartoon avatar, Chase Cunningham. I'm Dr. Zero Trust, pretty easy to find, and I'll help people all day long. I do a bunch of pro bono work with folks. I just help the battered women's shelter set up security infrastructure for their people. So
it's very awesome. And regular speaker. So very cool. All right, let's hit into this next setting here. So enhanced security mode configuration for intranet zone sites is set to disabled. This is interesting here because it enhanced security. Whenever I read something like that, I imagine it should be enabled. Why is this sounding a little contradictory?
Well, this is more of a limiting the wonkiness factor, especially when you're talking about intranet. So folks understand there's internet, which is us out on the internet, and there's intranet, which is inside of my environment, talking kind of to things in there. What happens typically is you have outdated certificates and weird server things and other old crap that somebody's stuck in there and whatever else. So you want to turn this to disable because it will make the user experience more streamlined and smooth. And it also won't cause you so many crazy alerts that come through that aren't actually valid. But this is entirely it's not really even a security necessary thing because you're already inside of an intranet. Yep. This is just making life not miserable for people doing things inside of that infrastructure.
So is it fair to, I always try to put it for complicated settings like this one, I'd classify this one as a little complicated, but I live in my home. Well, I live in my RV now, which is my home, right? If I have doors within my home that can be locked or unlocked, it's my house. I live in here. My wife lives in here. Like, I want all of the houses inside my place unlocked, right? This is saying, hey, we're going to allow you to do that because it's your home. You're already inside anyway. So yes, you don't need to lock the door from the kitchen to the bedroom. There's no reason to do that. You don't need to do an extra layer of security because you're already in. It's your house. Is that kind of what this is saying here?
That's pretty fair too. And then also imagine if that door between your kitchen and bedroom had, I don't know, it was made out of like steel from 1950 and it weighed 5 tons. Like, you don't ever want to open that thing. So this way Yeah, this way that door is just open and out of the way.
Okay, awesome. And again, for the listeners, this is a level 2 setting, so definitely use with caution when you see that in the bottom of the screen. But let's keep on going to this next setting here. So hide the first run experience and splash screen is set to enabled. Again, this goes back to what we were just talking about with, employees and clients only seeing what they need to see. So this sounds like just some functionality that they probably don't need to do their job. Is that all this is saying?
So there's also some value here from a security perspective, because like when I was red teaming, one of my favorite things to do was to basically I would DOS people's Wi-Fi, and then I would set up a reload page that came up with an iframe that would redirect them to go log in and give me their creds, and it worked like a champ. So this is a good way to stop that iframe from happening. But I did that when I was red teaming all over the planet, and it worked 99 times out of 100. So this is a good way to basically mitigate that from happening, because that iframe won't load.
And that 1 out of 100 it didn't work on had a hardened setting, probably.
No, the 1 out of 100 didn't work on. We actually just bricked the internet hard enough it didn't come back. Yeah.
But even in that scenario, and this is something we were talking about pre-show, like if you had this one setting, does that actually eliminate or at least mitigate the risk of successfulness of that attack?
Oh yeah, exponentially. Like that one, basically what would have happened was they would have went to that redirect, and it would have errored out, and then they would have been authenticated anyway with their current IDP, and life would have went on. But because people are, reactive, whenever they got to that next page and they need to get to the internet, they would enter their creds real fast and go on about their day.
So these settings that we're talking about, again, you have the background, like these individual settings, not if you do all 1,000, if you just do 10, 20, if you just start, these are eliminating real risk from someone who has actually exploited the default state of these settings.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I did one where we were doing a movie studio, and the number 2 guy at the studio had F5 the page so much because he was trying to get his access that we had literally like pages of his username and password from that browser.
Yep. All right. That is an awesome story there. So next setting here, in-app support enabled, which means this is already on by default, is set to disabled. Sounds like this is another, it's on the side, social engineering, but something where a bad actor could maybe make a pop-up that looks legit, get some information. Is that what this is talking about?
Oh yeah, this is I jokingly call this the retiree problem, because if you've got parents like my parents are retired, there's been times where they've gone to a site and there's been that, oh, you have malware on your system, click this so that we can help you now, or whatever else. Like that is a common scam that works, and people click it all the time. So doing this will eliminate that, and that way you don't have to deal with this. And to be perfectly honest, like my own mother, Dr. Zero Trust mother, did this twice in the same day. So it happens.
She had access. She was clicking the in-app support.
She entered her credit card and everything twice. And then she called me and said, why isn't this working? And I'm still getting this alert. And I was like, oh, Jesus.
Oh, no. Yep.
Like next time, call me first. Don't do that.
Well, let's talk about that. Call me first. Is there any scenario where we should allow in-app support? Like if I need support and Microsoft needs to get through, like, don't they need this setting available, Chase? Like what's the right way to get in-app support if not with this?
So you should be using some sort of like MDM or something on your box so that they can do those things and be able to push and whatever. However, if that's not available to you, there are settings within the browser that you can put in there that will only allow that from select sites, not from the internet writ large. So that solves that problem. So
there's some complementary controls you can put in place.
Yep.
And speaking of complementary control, and you have an extensive background with compliance as well. That's correct, right? CMMC.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've been dipped in that blood. Mm-hmm.
Burned in fire. Talk to us a little bit about complementary controls, because if you are a business who needs to accept risk on one of these settings, whichever one it is, we talk about a dozen every week, but if you need to accept risk on a setting to allow business functionality, what best practices can you share so that you still pass your audit with this?
Make sure that your legal department is aware of what you're doing, have documentation to back it up, keep your scans and those things up to date, and then be able to provide compensating controls for the approach that you're putting in there. And here's one thing, since you mentioned compliance, that I would make sure that people understand. If you're a small business that does like healthcare or dental clinic or whatever else, understand that those nifty, cool pieces of technology you've been sold to do whatever, they usually have a browser that talks to the internet, and they're set by default to just work like a browser. If you don't change those settings, you are in violation by day one of your HIPAA controls. So do those things.
So not only if you install that new piece of technology and it's just shelfware, you never actually set it up, but even if it's now installed, you are less compliant than before.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been at hospitals where they've said, okay, we'll go look at our systems, and you look and there's 300-400 like X-ray and MRI machines that are talking to the internet, and you're going, what? And it's talking via a browser, like web open to the internet.
Yep. Understand. I mean, this brings up a massive challenge, and I don't know of the best way to handle this at all. I mean, I imagine you have to invest into a platform because doing it manually sounds impossible. But what best practices or experience can you share about how an MSP or an SMB might be able to visualize their attack surface? How do you actually know what's there? Asset management is already hard enough. Now the entire attack surface. What can we do?
Well, there's good solutions out there nowadays in the market that can give you a pretty good running inventory. But I mean, you also have to have a programmatic approach to this. So you need to approach it from like a long-term. You're not going to get this right day one, day zero. And then the other thing I would tell people is, if you're not going to do security, if you're not going to do cyber, don't try and half-ass it, because that's only going to be wrong for you. Get an MSP, get somebody that this is what they do, and let them take care of it. There's legal reasons, there's compliance reasons, there's partnership reasons, there's budget reasons. Like, it's just a smarter way to do it. So I've probably spent more time talking customers of mine out of trying to do it themselves than I have actually helped them figure out how to do it themselves.
I like that a lot more. I mean, that's the big thing. And talking, I mean, as businesses grow, SMB becomes a mid-sized enterprise, mid to large enterprise, that internal IT staff, and SMB may have 1 or 2 people, mid may have, unfortunately only 3 to 5. It's typically not a large team, even at the mid-size level, but, any exposure you can share about, that transition from just having IT guys who do IT and security, mostly IT, to now building out an actual security team. Any just leadership expertise you can share? Like, when should a business look at having a dedicated security person as opposed to outsourcing?
When you don't have what I typically say is a 1-to-5 ratio, 1 security person to 5 employees, you're getting big enough. Yeah, when you're getting that big, you need some help. So even if it's a fractional MSP or something like that, jump into it. And I also would remind people too, think about it like your taxes. Like, I'm a small business. I don't do my taxes because God knows I don't want to, but also I don't know all the requirements, whatever. I have somebody that I got on Fiverr for $88 a month that does my taxes. At the end of the year, I file the paperwork and I'm done. Could I do my taxes? Sure. Is it going to suck? Absolutely. Do I want to do it? Hell no. Am I going to be safer and not go to jail? I use the tax people. So wrap your head around how you've justified business expenses and apply those for cybersecurity strategy.
Yep. That's a great way to look at it. So let's go into this next setting here, and I'm going to avoid my cat from stepping on everything yet again. This new RV setup, man, I don't know if they're ready for it. But this next one here, let users snip a math problem and get the solution with a step-by-step explanation in Microsoft Edge. To be perfectly honest, I had never heard of this setting until I made this slide. And this is something interesting too. I like to ask my guests, going into this, obviously you knew a lot of these settings. You didn't have to do a ton of prep, but had you heard of all these settings going into this, or did you have to do a little bit of prep? Especially
no, I had to do some looking here, especially this math thing, because I understand it, but I also sit there going well, number one, how many people are using Edge, and number two, how many people specifically are doing math snipping? However, it's obvious that at some point Microsoft has been burned with this. So if it's important enough for them to put it in the CIS benchmarks, it's important enough to do it.
Yep. I don't know how, I mean, I'm trying to think of the attacker point of view. I don't even know how this could be a security
My
risk.
guess is that there's probably when you let a user snip something, there's probably a privacy share that goes on or something weird that occurs. So this is this is an edge use case, if that's not a double entendre.
Edge use case. I love it. Yeah, I don't think we need to spend much time on this. This is a random setting. Just disable it. And the point here is, if you don't use it, eliminate the possibility of just turn it off, right? I mean, when Windows gives you the computer out of the box, so it works on your grandma's use case and Apple's, well, not Apple, that's a horrible example, but a Fortune 500 use case, right? It doesn't matter. They give it to you so it's fully functional. You won't have any issues getting to anywhere. Turn things off and then see what you need to turn back on.
Yeah.
I think one of the last things, where we at? Four more settings. All right. Ensure live captions allowed is set to disabled. This one to me just sounds directly like more of a privacy thing than a security thing. But hey, what do you have to say about this one?
I think this one goes into where they have like the disability settings for the hearing impaired stuff, and there are some issues that you have to be careful with that. But again, those are tangential use cases. So,
yep. Make the exception, document it, right? If you do have one of those handicaps where you do need access to the captions, right? Hard of hearing, whatever that is, this is something that just needs to be documented. It's not in my point of view, this is a low level of risk.
I would be fine with this risk all day long.
Yep.
Like, sure. Yeah.
Yep. Actually that brings up a good question as well. Obviously it depends on a case by case basis, but do you have any best practices of determining the level of risk of a setting or a process or an application? Like, do you have like a thought process or a best practice thing you go through mentally in determining the risk level of something?
So for me, like what I always advise people, and I think that there's a lot of value here, is anytime you're going to get ready to start setting up controls and do things like this to understand what your risk level is, run a real red team op first, because if your goal is to defend yourself from compromise, you don't know what the compromise will be until you've been compromised, and you want it to be friendly. So do that the first time, and that helps you really figure out what's up. And then after that, you're actually making intelligent risk decisions instead of right now, Kentucky windage, lick your finger and stick in the air. That's not exactly the best approach.
That's the other thing I talk about. And let's bring this up as a topic. So the word defensibility, I don't feel like that's said enough in the industry. And what I preach a lot is, hey, you may have that Intune expert on the team. You may have a GPO wizard on the team, PowerShell wizard, whatever that is. But if they're just shooting settings from the hip of what they think is right, there's a ton of double negatives. We've already talked about some in this presentation today. But, having CIS and saying, hey, if you do have to go to appear in court or whatever that is, or defend your reasoning, saying, hey, this was following this framework because they said to do this. Like, that's a little bit more powerful than saying, hey, this sounded like what I should do, so I did it, right?
Yeah, CIS is also 3 letters, just like CYA, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes, absolutely. That's what you have to do. And if you got to blame them to cover your own, it is what it is. That's the process. That's how everything works in today's world. But talk to us a little bit more on this defensibility concept. This is something you also talk about. Like, where does defensibility sit in your regime?
The actual practice you're looking at here is, in general, Greg Tuhill is great for this, but the whole saying is, if everything is a priority, nothing is. And that's the reality of what you're dealing with.
Absolutely. That's so good.
Yeah. You can't fix everything. You're going to miss stuff. However, there are things that are priorities. There are things that are valid risks. Apply controls there. And the other thing you have to remember is there's also this concept of contested space. You're always going to have contested space. And if you're able to minimize the contested space to where I can control it, think about the 300 versus, the hordes from the Persian Empire. If I can funnel them into a controllable space, I can defend.
Yep. And honestly, I love that metaphor too, because one of the things I share, and hey, disagree with me live on air or agree with me, whatever's correct, right? But something I share is by hardening these systems, by reducing that attack surface, you're allowing the efficacy of other security tools to increase, because now that EDR that's doing the learning mode doesn't see all of this anomaly behavior, because the employees are already enforced by the technical policies, which makes for a more enhanced behavior learning, better articulating the anomalies to stop. Like, does hardening systems, in your opinion, increase the efficacy of other security layers?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because then you're actually applying controls where they matter. Your policies are more correct, and that's a really good point too. Just so that people understand, because I just did a big workshop with the government on this whole thing. You don't set policies before you begin to figure out what the policy should be. You're going to get wrong. So you want to learn the policy and then apply the controls after you've kind of figured out what's going on. Because I've had people say, "Well, we're going to put a zero trust policy in place." Cool. What the hell is that? So if I don't know what's actually going on, what's talking, where the risks are, where the controls can be applied, I won't get my policy right. So know that and understand that. And it's chicken or egg, but the approach has to be along those lines.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, let's go into this next setting here. We got 3 more to go. So manage exposure of local IP addresses by WebRTC is set to disabled. Anything about exposure and IP addresses, if this was set to enabled, sounds horrible. So It makes sense disabled from an intuitive standpoint, but do you mind sharing what this is actually saying?
Yeah, so WebRTC is kind of an older thing that's still in there, but it does interact with the browser all the time. And this is something where if somebody was doing man in the middle or was able to get some of that traffic, they could start to kind of re-engineer or configure and start looking at how to get access to things that they probably shouldn't know about. I would call this almost more of an OPSEC type thing rather than just a straight up security issue. So it's just one of those deals like we were talking about. If you don't need it and it's not providing you value and it's not really used, turn it off.
I like the way you said that too. It's like the attacker needs to know where to go. And by having this disabled, you're at least shutting that layer of curtains, making it harder for them to see where they need to get to. It's just eliminating one data point of information to make their job easier.
Yeah. I mean, this specifically says local IP addresses. So like this is inside of the NAT, which is an issue, right? You're not talking about your generic IP address on the internet. So that's a problem. If I'm a bad guy and I see local stuff talking, Yep.
And keeping that bad guy hat on, we do talk about how these are mitigating attack methods, and we've talked about that at length, honestly. When a bad actor is targeting someone, if they get stopped by one of their normal attacks or one of their normal routine attacks or 2 of their normal routine attacks, is it more likely that they just move on, or do they usually get more aggressive and want to just keep trying harder? Like, what do you think is the typical attacker mindset when they do face a hardened system that is stopping most of their generic attacks?
So if you're dealing with script kiddies and those types, absolutely. If you're dealing with ransomware gangs and the folks that make money off of this, then probably they're going to move on quicker just because they do have business requirements and they're dealing with timeframes and whatever. If you're talking nation state and they're coming after you, there's a reason that they're doing that, and it's a national thing, and they're going to keep coming at you. So expect that to get compromised. I would say, if you're dealing with nation state, you're probably in a space where it's pretty legit anyway. But the majority of bad guys, if you will kind of find somewhere else to go because of reasons that they're, number one, if they're a script kiddie, they're probably live with their mother and they got other things to do. And then if they're hacker bad guy that lives in Russia, they're making money on this. They don't have time to waste with you. If it's harder for them, they'll go find someone else easier.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's go to this next setting here. So notify a user that a browser restart is recommended or required for pending updates. So this is set to actually requiring to show a recurring prompt to the user indicating that a restart is required. So this, again, I mean, intuitively, yes, we want to restart. We want to do updates. Like, that's obviously an update goes out because there was some type of bug. It's not always like a user experience update. It is typically a back-end thing that we aren't even going to notice, but we need to perform the update. Unfortunately, Windows updates and everything else sometimes does break stuff. So requiring this right away sounds a little dangerous from the UX user experience perspective, but why should we consider making this required?
Well, there's also a CIS CYA sort of thing here too, because I at least am able to go by the logs and say, look, I let you know that you need to update your browser, and you were the one that wound up getting popped because you clicked on a link because you're a moron or whatever else. So, I mean, there's the value proposition there of making sure that you have traceability, accountability, and veracity of what's going on. And it's also just good practice, because at the end of the day, when you do push an update, like you said, and you brick somebody's machine, like, look, man, I told you for 3 weeks that you needed to restart your browser. You didn't do it. Eventually, I'm just going to do it, and you got to deal with it. So I think this one is almost more of a CYA compliance type thing than it is a security control.
Because this is just telling them, hey, it's coming. This needs to happen. Yep.
I've tried to
putting the accountability almost on the employee. It's like, hey, we had these technical policies in place. They read it because they hit OK on the message.
Oh yeah, and people do that all the time. Oh yeah, whatever, and click, go on, and then it's like, look, man, I have logs that show you said okay 12 times. Like,
yep, absolutely. All right, and the last setting of the day, I believe, restrict exposure, again, local IP addresses by WebRTC something about the rule of three comes to mind with this setting, but is set to enabled, which again, restrict and enabled, right? We are restricting. So allow public interface over HTTP default route. This doesn't expose the local IP address. I can't think of a scenario we'd ever want to expose that IP address, but what is this actually saying? If there's any more details you want to share on top of the last setting?
I mean, really, goes back to the other RTC thing, but there you're dealing with ports. You're dealing with the fact that you can't expose stuff via like 80 and 443 to some degree and whatever else. So this is just a good way of kind of, like you said, making sure that you're covering all your bases. Honestly, at the level of risk, if you do the other RTC thing, then this one's probably pretty low on the scale, but it just is a good one to know and to be able to have as part of the policy control. And again, if you don't use it and you don't need it,
you don't need it. Yep. And these RTC ones, especially, these are level 1 settings. There's
RTC is old school. Like I was doing RTC hacks a decade ago. I mean,
I'll ask you the quiet question out loud. Why are so many of these not configured by default? Is there any behind the scenes of Microsoft logic you want to talk towards?
I mean, it's really one of those things like you were talking about is Microsoft is always in competition with the others, Macs and to some degree Linux, as far as, usage and growth and customer acquisition. And the goal is to shoot for the floor, right? To make it as so easy that if you can fog up a mirror, you can use the machine. And they have to do those things and have them turned on. And then they kind of sit there and go, I hope you turn off the stuff that's risky, because it is risky and we know about it, but we made it work.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. And that covers the settings for today. So just a couple more slides to kind of summarize what we talked about. But the first one, really talking about the MITRE attack techniques. So CIS does take the time to map their recommendations to the MITRE attack techniques. We have, 6 of them listed here. And these specific 6 are linked back to the settings we talked about today. Obviously, search safety is where we started and we moved on through that. So you gave a lot of good examples from your own experience about leveraging these settings from an attacking point of view. These ones here on the screen, these are pretty intuitive as to what they are. But is there any more stories or anything more you want to share with, the security perspective of hardening these settings and what it does to that attacker?
Yeah, I mean, just think about, you had a really good sort of reference there, is think about your home. What's the first thing that you have that's open to the world? It's your front door. Your browser's your front door. So if you're not taking care of your front door, all of the rest of it is kind of for naught. I mean,
you can have a fence, but if your door is open or the fence is unlocked.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those deals of, it just makes sense that the fixes you're talking about here typically are not going to make people miserable. It's going to, nowadays, most enterprise systems are going to be okay with the things we're talking about turning off. And if it's me, I would always rather have the position of, I applied a policy, I put default deny in place, and then someone had a tangential use case I need to enable, I can deal with that. So, I mean, the strategy, thinking intelligently, those types of things, go forward. And I'll also stand and die on the hill that if you take care of the browser, you could reduce your spend on phishing training, which is kind of just throwing money down the phishing training hole.
I didn't know you had such a strong opinion on phishing.
Oh, dude, my goal, my mission in life is to end that whole business practice.
I mean, from my perspective and everything I've learned, like I learned during these webinars. Yes, I make the slides. Yes, I have to learn the settings, but the stories I hear from people and just the linking back to the amount of risk mitigated by having these in place of a phish being successful, it blows my mind that we went the direction of human training before changing the settings.
Yeah, I always, when somebody talks to me about phishing training, I'm like, if you were driving on the highway without your seatbelt on, would it be effective for me to train you to put your seatbelt on seconds before a crash? Or would it be better to give you an airbag and tell you to buckle up before you leave the house?
Or in a perfect world, you force that seatbelt to kick on before you can sign into the car, sign into the computer.
Exactly. And it's just one of those things of like, again, for the record, you should train your people to be aware and understand the risks and those things. However, it is not a mitigation of the threat.
Is there any, I mean, it sounds like you've gone through the rabbit hole of this experience. Is there any regulatory requirements of phishing training or audit?
Unfortunately,
this is still very real, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is a requirement. What's really comical too is phishing training is a requirement. Browser hardening is not. And you're like, what?
People are the #1 line of defense. I'm like, mean, they are the source of
met people?
exploitation,
Yeah.
but
Do you know people? Because people kind of suck. Like,
we do just click the yes button. We want to get through the training.
I mean,
Is there any repercussions for failing a fish? I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. You have to do more.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the funny thing too is like, let me get this straight. Fishing training. I'm going to train you not to get fish by sending you a link to click to take fishing training that trains you on links.
Interesting space. All right.
And by the way, how are you going to interface with that training? It's going to be the browser. So
the full circle life. It is right through the browser. We do the training on not to do things. Anywho, that is as a point of view I did not know that you had. So very excited to talk about that with you. All right, this last slide here. Chase, I mean, we talked about the security perspective. We talked about the resource perspective. I mean, we just talked about the compliance. We really talked about all these points throughout. I mean, you might be my all-time easiest guest, Chase. So congrats there. We're even making solid time. This is incredible. Anywho, if you were talking to someone an enterprise, an MSP, it doesn't matter who, someone who's never taken the step to begin hardening their browser or hardening the OS or doing any configuration management for that matter, anything where would you tell them to prioritize it, right? This is a SMB that just transitioned to doing security. Like they're just starting to take it serious. Like, is this the first thing they should look at? Like, should they get an EDR first? Like, what would you talk to someone considering doing hardening today?
First thing I would tell them is to look at your identity and access management program and make sure people don't have crappy passwords and that multi-factor is there in some way, shape, or form. And then this would probably follow that. So I think that, I mean, look at the Verizon
roadmap I preach to people.
Yeah, I mean, look at the Verizon DBIR to me is a biblical reference. And if I have 10 years of people saying it's users clicking links and bad passwords and crappy access, that's what I fix first. I'm not concerned about the crazy 0-day NSA level exploit. I don't want some moron using, password 1 to access my
Let's talk about the 0-day exploit, whatever it is, the CVE that comes out. With a hardened system, are you at less of a risk of that new CVE being exploited?
Potentially, but then again, I mean, there always could be some mega thing that comes out. Like when
depends on the CVE, of course,
right? Like the internal blue leak and those types of things. But I mean, in truth, what you're dealing with is again the level of effort for the adversary. Why would I go configure an NSA eternal blue hack when I can just get some jackass to click a link?
This is true. So very much. That's cool to hear how high this sits on your list. I mean, identity and asset configuration. I mean, those are the two things that I preach daily as well. And I mean, if you look at the CIS controls, numbers 1 and 2 is literally asset inventory. And then it goes into configurations. Account management is literally all 3, 4, 5, data protection, configuration management, account management, which is all leading towards identity and this aspect of having things locked down. So spot on. You're in line with CIS.
I might have read it once or twice.
Unfortunately, we all have. All right. Well, Chase, that's really all I have for today's educational session. Do you mind just kind of wrapping up with some closing thoughts? Tell us about this event you're about to be speaking at. And if there's more you want to share on Demo Force, go for it, brother.
Yeah, sure. So if I can ever help anybody with anything, reach out to me. I'm getting ready to do a speech here at the HSBC Cyber Innovation Summit in New York City. I've got a really great view of the river. It's actually gorgeous out. And then on the Demo Force side, if you're a startup or a vendor or a reseller or anybody that's trying to get people to access your software and try it out, and you want to optimize that whole thing, reach out to us because we can fix it. And it is a much more streamlined experience. And the funny thing is you will see crazy return on that investment. And it's a lot cheaper than trying to hire human sales engineers.
And it's easier than us spinning up our own publicly facing VMs for people to use and managing that. I can't praise what DemoForce is doing enough. You guys have been great partners to Senteon. We're excited to get in there and talking about some of the stuff in the pre-show. One of the things we intend to do and hopefully can find the right way to do it is showing a real attack technique against a default default Demo Force box versus a hardened Demo Force box to show how the attacker may fail or that specific technique may fail or prove to you that it doesn't work. And then maybe we'll prove hardening isn't actually a thing, which is very unlikely.
Yeah, our machines are made to be destructible. So you want to run malware, you want to blow them up, by all means, go ahead. And if your tech does what it says it does, the user should have a good experience.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to wrap up. I know you have to speak, so if you got to hop off, feel free. Otherwise, I'll talk to you in a minute. But
all right, y'all have a good one.
Later, Chase. So we do have our following presentations coming up here. So we will be back next week with a tool, and we will be wrapping up the year. I have the wrong date there, but we will be wrapping up the year with Matthew Fish from Fort Mesa, talking about the last dozen settings of edge hardening. Again, for the listeners here, we do put our recordings on YouTube, so you can watch this after the fact. And if you do mention you joined the webinar series, we do offer 100 free assessments just for being here. So thank you again for being here, everyone, and we'll talk to you.